Go. You're good.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Really excited to be here today. I'm going to just start sharing my screen. Please let me know if anybody's having a hard time hearing me or seeing me. We've got a lot of ground to cover. So real excited to be doing this presentation. Also, just the Atten folks have been working on the layout paragraphs module for a couple of years now. And it's been real exciting since we've contributed it back to the community as an open source project. Real exciting to see the feedback we've gotten, seeing the adoption that's going on, and also seeing people using it in ways we didn't expect. So but today we're going to talk about, specifically, we're going to talk about the authoring experience use case, meaning like how layout paragraphs improves the authoring in Drupal. So I'm going to just set the table. I'll share the agenda, and then I'll get into this presentation in just a little bit. But first, my name is Joe Crespo. I'm the Director of Accounts at Atten Design Group. Today is actually my 9-year Atten anniversary. I've been with the company for 9 years, but Atten's been around for 22. The last 9 years has been a real pleasure. Some of the best projects in my career have happened here, and some of the best clients I've gotten to work with work at Stanford. So I'm real excited to be here. One of the things that drew me to Atten 9 years ago, I was a developer back then. And I'd been a developer for a long time, but I was fairly new to Drupal back in 2013. And I was really excited about this platform. I felt like as a developer, a lot of stuff that that I was doing on every project, Drupal just did. And I didn't have to continually repeat myself. So all of like the sort of dumb work that I was doing was already taken care of. And I was real excited about that. But one of the things that Drupal does extremely well is how it manages structured content. And if you're not familiar with structured content, maybe you've heard that term, or adaptive content, or the content model, or the data model, or the content data model. Just from a high level, what structured content is, information or content that's organized in a really predictable way, right? And so if you think about, if you're a developer and you're familiar with database tables and fields, maybe this will sound like old hat, but like, when you are organizing your content, you can think about it like a spreadsheet, right? Where all of this content is really highly structured. And so, but when you think about a computer, computers are really fast, but they're also profoundly stupid. And so having structured content in a way that's really predictable for a computer really helps, a computer being able to filter this list by like what's related to the blog, or filter this list by what's related to the date of completion. This is just how this content is being stored in a structured way. You could also take this same piece of content and drop all of it into a single field. It's the same content, but a computer just can't work with it very easily. It has to be parsed and extracted. It's not great. So, and when you look at like other CMSs, competing CMSs that work like WordPress, or even on the low end of the spectrum, where you look at like Wix or Squarespace, they do a great job with the authoring experience, like a very highly visual and engaging authoring experience to get that content into the CMS, but that content is being stored in the CMS the way you see it at the bottom of the page. It's just a big blob of content. And so when we were working with Drupal, we need to work with structured content. Cross-linking content is really important for our clients. And my boss said this great quote. He's like, Drupal is great at working with content, but not content people. And so what we were looking to do with layout paragraphs is actually solve this problem for content people while still retaining Drupal's superpowers as well. So today, that's just me setting the table for today's conversation. Today, here's what we're going to cover. What are we talking about in layout paragraphs? We'll talk about the status and adoption of the project. I'm going to do a live demo. Wish me luck. It's first time doing it with one paw. Do a demo of layout paragraphs on a Drupal 9 out of the box website. And then I'll do another one with a customized layout paragraphs on atten.io. And then we'll hopefully have some time for questions. I have one of my colleagues, Joel Steidel, here to help answer some questions as well if they get highly technical. And the prereqs for today's conversation are, one, just experience using Drupal. It's probably not going to make a lot of sense if you don't work with that CMS. The second is experience working with the paragraphs module. Layout paragraphs is a field formatter that works with paragraphs, and you'll see what we're talking about in a second. And then experience just configuring using the Drupal configuration page. This is going to be really helpful for this today. So, okay. What is layout paragraphs? It's a contributed Drupal module. We'll share the link in a moment. It provides a low or no code drag and drop visual content authoring experience for your users. It is built on the structured content model, so it preserves your data model. It doesn't put it all into one big blob in the database. And it uses a lot of Drupalisms using workflow and configuration field widgets, and field formatters. And no migration is necessary. If you're working with paragraphs now, it's just a few clicks away from working with layout paragraphs. And finally, it provides APIs for further improving the authoring experience. Great. So next one is the status and adoption. The module page is drupal.org, project layout paragraphs. Let's talk about the releases. I think one thing about when you look at like contributed modules in the Drupal space, like how active are they in the issue queue? How often are they issuing new releases? This is really important. Of course, adoption rate as well. We have a stable production ready release 1.0, and then we have a 2x branch that's a complete rewrite of the 1.0. We're using 2x for production, and we have a stable release imminent. With respect to adoption, this module was launched last summer. We have over 3,000 sites using it currently, and that number is growing. There's about almost 200,000 sites using paragraphs. So we expect this number to go up pretty substantially in the coming months. Okay. Oh, wow. We got into this part real fast. The part that I'm most nervous about. I'm going to close this and get to the demo. Oh, boy. Where is my demo window? Oh, here we go. So I'm bringing over this new window. We have a demo site up on Pantheon. This is, what you might have seen on Drupal last week before Olivero and Jin were incorporated in core. This is just the 7 theme, basic Drupal theme. Just going to like the sort of classic Drupal authoring experience. Going to add content. I've got the blog post here as a classic authoring, which is, you have the blog post title. Let me see if I can do this quickly. Let me grab some Greek text to drop into the body field. And I'm going to upload an image to round out the blog and just to let everybody know it's a QR code. All right, and when I hit save, here you have a page with text and an image. And if I want to change the layout on this, I've got 3 options. One, I go into structure, content type, blog post, manage display and start configuring things. 2, I open up the code base and I start messing around with the templates. Or 3, I launch Layout Builder and start working with Layout Builder. All of those solutions are valid solutions, but they're not solutions for content editors. And again, Drupal is great at working with content, but not content people. And so when you ask like a marketing person or a communications person, hey, why don't you go in and do some administration on your site? That's not really what they're looking to do. They need to launch their landing page. They need to launch their article. They need to launch their resource on the site. That's where their strengths are. And so one solution that came up a while ago was using paragraphs, right? And so the idea is that you could use, let's say, a not so basic page here, and I'll just create, a page title, and then I can just start adding like paragraph blocks. All right, so maybe I've got the text, and then I'll let's add a web video, and let me I already posted a video, so let me add an existing video, select one, grab one of these talks that we did a long time ago. All right, I hit save, go to the front end, and I can see, great, I've got text and a video. Let me hit back, and again, this is just the paragraphs authoring experience. If I want to move the video around, I can grab the drag handle and move it up, right? And I can hit save, and now I've got it this way. That's great, fantastic. We're going in the right direction. I can keep on adding and stacking paragraph types on top of one another again and again and again to build a page. But there's a few things here that are missing. One is that this interface that I'm looking at doesn't show me at all what this is going to look like in the end. And as a marketing or communications or just a content editor generally, I really want to see what is coming out. And so, I can, and this is, of course, if I add a bunch of these, it's going to start really being a problem. I can collapse this, and that's great. But we think we can do a little bit better. So what we did was, I was going to head over to the structure, content types. And again, this is not something I'd expect a content editor to do. It's just for the purposes of this demo. Is I'm going to go just manage, so not so basic page, I'm going to manage fields. As you can see, the content field, which is this field here, and the paragraph types within it, this content field is an entity reference revision field, and going into, you can see that it is referencing paragraphs. And when you go to edit, you can see these are the paragraph types that are available to me as a user. I'm going to head back to managing the content type. If I can find my way all the way back there. There we go. The not so basic page. I'm going to manage the form display. Now, managing form display in Drupal is basically changing the node edit form by default. And right now we have the content is using the paragraphs widget. This is a stable release. There is another widget, which is the layout paragraphs widget. I'm just swap it out. I'm going to take a look at some of my settings options here. You could do a preview view mode if you want. If you're just using this in teasers, you can essentially set the max nesting depth of how many layouts can be nested within one another. You can require that all the paragraphs, like if you add a video, it needs to be added to a layout. It's inside of a section within the layout. We'll talk about what that looks like in a sec. And then placeholder image. So just, start adding content. So this is what's going to see, what they'll see when it's empty, right? I hit save. I'm going to go back to my not so basic page. Now this is what I've done on that configuration screen is change this field formatter from a paragraphs field formatter to a layout paragraphs field formatter. And when I hit reload, I can now see what I'm actually working with. And so, and if, for example, I just keep on, I'm going to add an image. Let's grab media. I'll grab this code here, hit insert, hit save, and now I've got another thing. I hit save, I can go to the front end, and I can see what it looks like. Well, I mean, layout's not great. I am a developer, not a designer, but we can do even better on this layout. So like right now, when I go to edit, when I'm on the edit screen, I'm looking at an edit screen, right? This is not quite the same thing as the front end. So I'm gonna go to the front end, pull it up, head over to back to manage form display and head over to manage display. Now again, I'm in the content type blog post. The content currently is in the format is a rendered entity, but I'm going to change that to layout paragraphs builder. It's experimental module, but it's a, and when I head back to the page and hit refresh, I now, oh, hang on. Oh, I actually have to save this, I believe. Am I on the right content type? Not so basic page title. No. Uh-oh. Live demos, people. This is what happens. So let me head on back to make sure I'm on the right thing. Manage display, layout paragraphs builder experimental. I hit update and start content. Hit update, hit save, and now we should be good to go. I go to the front end and view. Nope. Joel, I might need some help here already. Clear them caches. Oh my goodness, you are absolutely right. I have the cache page open for exactly that reason. Thank you, folks. been a while since I was a developer. This is a, did this actually work? No, no, it did not. Oh my goodness. Content, layout, paragraphs. Man, I did this like 16 times today. I should have done it 17. Edit. No, it's still working on the back end, on the front end. It's not pulling up. So, okay, let's see. I've got to solve this problem because you know, we got to launch this site. So, heading back into display. Oh, okay, folks. I know what I did wrong. I'm on the default. I'm not on the full content view. Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay, I am going to once again. We're on the blog post content type. We are in the manage display field. And be sure to you know, manage the correct display, not like I did just now. So I'm going to go layout build paragraphs builder experimental, hit save, hit the front end, go back to the front end, and now I can now edit the content on the front end without any kind of jumping around. I can also do something. I'm going to start adding some sections to this. I'm going to add a 2-column section, hit save, and you know what? I'm going to just bring this text, just drag it up here to where it ought to go. Grab this image, do the same thing over here. You know, you should always put the big video above the other stuff and hit save. And I can actually see what I'm doing as I'm doing it. And again, even with the guffaw and mulligan just now, we were able to configure this in just a few minutes. This is what you see on just a bare bones out of the box Drupal site. We just have, you know, paragraphs and some supporting modules, layout paragraphs and some supporting modules like stories to create the paragraph types and paragraphs to create to save those entities in the database. This is the bare bones version of it. Let's head on over to a styled version of what we're looking at. So I'm going to head over to the Atten site. And this is what happens, you know, same tool. We use it really, really extensively on our site. Head over to the home page and see what I'm talking about. We use layout paragraphs on our site pretty extensively. So we've got our home page is powered by it, and all of our case studies are powered by it. And I'm going to just add a quick case study for the work we did with WETA. If you're not familiar with WETA, they're a TV station in DC. You might be familiar with Downton Abbey. So wait, am I doing the right one? I want to do case study. Let's add WETA. I'm gonna just jump right over all the stuff I don't absolutely need to add. This is just the metadata for the page. You know, OG description, image, all of this is just metadata that's being used to help inform other people on the page, but about what the page is about, but it's not about the layout. So all I'm doing is basically making a stub of a node. I'm hitting save, and now when I hit save, I'm immediately taken to the front end of the site. I'm looking at the page that I need to build. I'm going to start creating content. We actually have, I mentioned this earlier, but I didn't talk through this. I'm going to go back to the bare bones Drupal site here. We can also enforce layouts. So, for example, let me see if I can drag this in the right spot. Like this is, we can enforce the use of sections on the site, and that's a very simple configuration change. That was the other thing was a pretty simple one too. Just going back to here. Just hitting require paragraphs be added inside of a layout. And that way you can enforce these layouts throughout. So you can just add paragraphs, you can enforce layouts. There's some cool, user implications for that in terms of like the advanced user versus like a novice user. We have some different use cases that we've done for some clients, and I'm happy to talk about that Q&A. Okay, back to the Atten site. Let's move away from this. Okay, we've stubbed out a basic, a simple page, a landing page, excuse me, a case study page, and I'm going to add a section. As you can see, the sections options that are available to me are different here. These are the options that we use on our site. This is completely configurable. I'm going to add a 1-column layout and hit save. And then I'm going to add a masthead into that. This is one of our specialty content types that, one of our specialty paragraph types that we use exclusively for our case studies. Just again, I'm just going to, this is our media library. So it's incorporated directly into our media library. I just load a few other items here. I'll grab a couple of images for the masthead, hit place. I love this Muhammad Ali image. I want it to be more prominent, so I'm going to move it to the first position and then hit save. And now I can see it on the page. I also see that this background, this white background, is no good. So let me fix that. And we've got in this, we're using style options. It's a module that we created for uniform styles across the site. And again, this is 100% configurable as well. So I'm going to change the background color to a red color. And I could, if I wanted to, put an image back there, but I think that would be too busy. I'm going to go background color. And since that's pretty dark, I'm going to go with a color scheme of light on dark and hit save. And now I have this. And just basically build the page like a layer cake. So add a 2-column section. Let's see if I can find my source material to drop in here. And I bet I close the window because that's what I do. Okay. So you know what? I don't need the absolute source. I can do it from anywhere. Okay, great. So I'm just going to add this 2-column layout, and I'm going to do, in this version of on our site, we're using a custom version of layout paragraphs that adds a little bit more just UI sugar to the whole system here. I'm adding a piece of content, and I'm just dropping it straight into the page. When I edit text in this instance, I'm able to edit straight onto the page without having to open a modal so I can see it as I'm going. And I'm just going to write something here, and I'll head back to this guy and address this because this is an important point. And I'm going to, and just going back to that style options item, I can go back in here, hit styles, and I can apply this style to the entire section, or I can apply it to a region within this section. So I'm going to go with a primary. That's the first item. I'm going to make it padded, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a background color just for some differentiation, and hit save. And now I've got that, and I just keep on going. I'm going to add one more. Let's do a 3-column layout. And this time, and again, you can see in the layouts, we have like a header and footer inside of the layout, so you can really be flexible about how you're using them. I'm going to just add a slideshow. Now, we all know slideshows have bad rap. There are some good use cases for slideshows, and this is one of them. And I'm going to just grab these 5 images and place them and hit save. And now I have a working slideshow. And again, the slideshow has a little bit, it's not so great when it doesn't have a color behind it. So let me put a color behind it. So hit save, and now there you have it. Now that I think this is about as much a page I want to build right now, so I'm going to hit save, and we can see when we reload the page, we can see exactly how it's going to be rendered on the front end. As you can see, when you're in the authoring experience, the layout paragraphs, or in this case, there's a slightly different version. It's what we call Mercury Editor. It's a layout paragraphs with a little bit of that, like a few other modules that help push it down the field a little bit. When we're editing it, there is a little bit of Chrome that's added around the elements to help you with drag handles and stuff. And it's also worth noting, just a quick note, like all of this stuff is draggable. I can move it to wherever I think is appropriate for the work. And again, as you can see, this blue stays. And then it's also worth noting that, as you build these pages, they get pretty tall, and it becomes real hard to just grab this section and drag it up to the top if I wanted to. So we also added a bunch of handles here. So I can drag this to wherever I want it, or I can pop the section up the page. This is also good for accessibility. We have our accessibility experts check the work, and we take that work very seriously. And so this is basically a layout paragraphs. And as you can see, by the way, in this use case, I'm really doing something that you probably don't want an editor to do, which is put the slideshow at the top and then put the heroes in the middle. There are ways we have within the layout paragraphs module, there is layout paragraphs permissions, which will prevent that kind of behavior. And you can also configure layout paragraphs in ways that you can limit where things will be dropped. I don't have that ready to show today, but I'm happy to talk about how we have done that elsewhere. I think that's the end of my live demo. So my panic part is over. I'm going to go back to just finishing up the presentation. So we, one of the reasons why we're really excited about, we've taken layout paragraphs is basically the first step in our view. We are also just sort of pushing the ball down the field with what we're calling the Mercury Editor. It's an authoring experience built on top of layout paragraphs using the stories module, using a style options module, and a few other modules to just sort of bring it all together in a cohesive experience. That is what I've got. And I see the first question in the chat. I'm going to leave this up for just a second. And the first question is, how does this work? How does this differ from Layout Builder? That's a great question, and let me show you. They say talking about music's like dancing about architecture. So we saw this experience, right? When I go to edit the content, I can modify this. Let me head over to our bare bones Drupal site where I have Layout Builder working. Of course, I closed the window. That's my MO. Oh boy. Go find my way back to the demo site. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm going to add a piece of content. And when we have this article here, and this article content type is configured to work with Layout Builder. Layout Builder is a really powerful tool.
Joe, really quick.
Yeah.
Can you share your screen again?
Oh no! I stopped sharing my screen, didn't I? That's what I do. Look, you know what? Let's all come back here in an hour. We'll do this again.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm in the bare bones Drupal site. Just got just some regular content. I'll just grab an image and just drop it in, and I'm gonna hit. Let me make sure I don't make this accessible. And hit that and hit save. And then if I want to, I go head over to layout and I can customize this layout myself. This experience, I can customize this individual article using Layout Builder, but this experience is built not for content editors. This is not an authoring experience. This also doesn't give me a sense of what the page is looking like in the end completely. And I have to walk away from the page to get to this interface. So all of that it's not a big deal if you're a developer, it makes sense. But if you're a content editor and I just want to make a landing page, I just want to promote something at this conference I'm going to, this is too much. This is just it's building sandcastles with a bulldozer. And so that is, I hope that answers your question. I closed nothing. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm just catching up with the questions here. Okay. Yes, and thank you. And Joel, by the way, I think you can talk, so feel free to jump in if you want to start answering questions. I don't mind being interrupted. Okay. So we have. Do we need to add our own layouts, or are the ones out of the box? and how's the accessibility on these? So layout paragraphs is essentially configured. Claire, am I still sharing my screen? Just want to make sure I didn't like.
Yes, you are.
Okay, overzealous and turn off the share. So we're not providing layouts. It's like there's not templates that come with layout paragraphs. Layout paragraphs come with options to add various sections. One thing we've done on a site that we just launched recently for Tufts, and I can't show you the back end on this, but I can show you the front end. What we did here is on an article. Just go head over to an article page. What we did is this is a header. This is one layout paragraphs field, and this down here is a second layout paragraphs field. And that way, what we're doing is we're limiting the number of paragraph types that are available in the header, and we're limiting in this area, we're not allowing users to add sections. We're only adding components. You can add a video or an image or text, but you can't like create like a 6-column layout in this wide of a space. And so what we're doing, so instead of working with particular templates, what we're doing is we're looking to provide like flexible templates that would give you options for the header, options for the body. I hope that answers your question. I want to. Okay, I'm having a hard time staying up with these questions. Can you nest sections? Yes, you can nest sections. That is a configuration setting on layout paragraphs. So when I go to content types and go to my not so basic page here, and I go to manage form display, I can set the depth. And so 0 will prevent nesting, and then you can set 1, 2, all the way up to 10. So it's worth noting that even though you are nesting sections within sections, it's not being saved in the same way that paragraphs saves the paragraph types, in the sense that you can, when in paragraphs, in classic paragraphs, when you use nested layouts, what happens is you're actually, the database calls really get slowed down because you have join on join on join on join. Oh. How do you deal with heading order? When we nest, so first of all, most of our, sorry, let me finish answer the question. When you have nested sections, you see performance issues because what's happening is your Drupal is loading up the node, and then it's loading up the paragraph that's then loading up another paragraph that's then loading up another paragraph. And so that's it's just sort of like a cascade slowdown on the database call. So layout paragraphs is built in a way that you don't have to nest sections, and the way that the content is saved is actually saved as an unordered list. So when you're loading these sections, even nested sections, you're also just loading them all at once. You're not doing multiple joins. Yeah, and so yeah, don't do that.
Joe, let me hop in real quick.
Thank you,
so typically a way a lot of us accomplished this like whole kind of column thing was to nest paragraphs. Really, we built layout paragraphs to get around that completely. So for the column piece, that's using Drupal core's layout API. So layout API ships, I think, with maybe 4 different layouts out of the box, and then you can create your own layouts. Layouts can have as many different like regions as you want, so you're kind of in control over how a layout looks. But what's cool about how layout paragraphs works is it's not saving like a nested entity reference structure, and so it's a much cleaner. It's just a flat, for all intents and purposes, it's just a flat, like, however many paragraphs you create, that's it. There's not like a nested structure. And then it's using paragraphs behavior to say, all right, this paragraph belongs to this region in this particular section. I hope that makes sense. But it's not like a whole bunch of nesting going on.
There's also another benefit to this approach, which is we have a lot of international clients that have their sites that are posted in multiple languages. And one of the challenges of working with paragraphs on an international, like a site, a multilingual site, is one of the challenges with working with a standard paragraphs module on that is that even when you translate the page, because of the way it's saved in the database, you don't have an asynchronous layout. So like if you have a page in English and a page in Spanish, and you wanted them to be laid out slightly differently because maybe you have different audiences, that's not possible with paragraphs. With layout paragraphs, it's not a problem. When you translate it, the page is copied, and then at that point, the page then moves into its, like, essentially it's its own item to be worked with, and so you can change the layout as you'd like. Do you mind, Joel? There's a question here about revisions that I don't think I can answer. How does layout support? Does it support? Oh, you already did in the okay.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, paragraphs is built on entity reference revisions, which was created specifically for the paragraphs module to support revisions. Layout paragraphs doesn't do anything to like go against that, if that makes sense. So it's revisions is supported.
Awesome. Okay.
Is there a parent-child relationship with the page revisions and the paragraph revisions, so that if you go back to a previous version of the page, it'll have, whatever the current version of each paragraph was at that time? Because I know there's some issues with Layout Builder where you can get like the revisions of the blocks are kind of out of sync with the version of the page.
Got it. So the revision history would simply be, whatever the paragraph content was at that point in time of revision, and where it existed in the layout at that point in time. So it's like a full snapshot of that revision history. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay. Let me actually, I think let's do a live demo live. Why not? While we're here. All right. So the WIDA page. All right. Head over to revisions. I'll go back to the revision where I had the slideshow at the top of the page, and there it is. So we can revert to previous versions of the page. It plays nicely. Okay, how are we doing? Any more questions out there?
I think you got the ones in chat.
Sweet.
I think, pretty sure.
Well, okay. Well, I'm going to assume just absolute stunned silence. I'm going to just throw this up on the screen. If you want to learn more about Mercury Editor, it's built on top of layout paragraphs. We have a page for you. Also, download the module from D.O and feel free to play around with it. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you see anything, please join us in the issue queue. We're on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. We're on elsewhere. Please reach out. And then, of course, I always love to hear from people. Please feel free to email me, joe@atten.io. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. This has been a fun experience. And thank you, Joel, for coming in and saving my bacon.
Thank you.
This is very
I have a technical
exciting.
question.
So,
Awesome. Hey.
Joel, I have a technical question
Oh.
while you're here. Sorry. I'm curious, since Atten Group is working in both Backdrop and Drupal 9, which are two major systems for higher ed, as we heard yesterday. I'm wondering how this layout system compares with Backdrop and Drupal 9, because Backdrop has very powerful layout system that comes out of the box. So I'm wondering if things that you learned or features that you built are in any way transferable or applicable both ways?
So we started working with layout. I started working on layout paragraphs when Drupal 8 was, the Drupal version, and so it was very nice with Drupal 8 and 9. We don't have a Drupal 7 or Backdrop version of paragraphs currently. I think we've had some conversations about it, but like whether or not there's a commitment is that we'd be putting the cart before the horse. I know we're committed to working on Backdrop projects, and we're excited about that. This took a couple thousand hours to get here, and I want to make sure that we're not, that I'm not. Essentially, my boss is the person who wrote this thing, and so I don't want to relegate him to working nights and weekends unless he wants.
Totally. It's more was a technical general. It's not like, can you guys migrate it? It's more like how does it compare technically? Is this is it because there are some features when we're looking at Backdrop versus 9 that are very similar, and then there are other features that are completely different.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was just, since Joel worked in both places and has lots of expertise in this specific matter, I just wanted to ask whether they are close or very far apart from each other.
Yeah, they're very far apart from each other in terms of what Backdrop adopted into Backdrop Core in terms of layouts is closer to what Panels was doing in Drupal 7. And so, yeah, I'm not familiar with how it exposes. I think one huge advantage of Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 is how it exposes layouts kind of system-wide. And I'm not quite sure that Backdrop has that same capability. So the ability to connect paragraphs and layouts in Backdrop, I have no idea how feasible that would actually be in the first place. But that would be interesting to explore. I think what is in Backdrop Core is probably more similar to Layout Builder in Drupal 9 as a direct comparison.
Okay, I was just curious because we worked with Backdrop layouts directly, and the big difference from Drupal 7 that you have this ability similar to what you were showing for layouts. You can pick the layout at the visual level, right? And so that you have an option to import layouts, install layouts, which is much easier than it was in Drupal 7. So this is like a huge step forward, and I was just curious if, what's the technical thing behind that. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, if there's any other questions, okay, if you're anything like me, in 15 minutes, you're gonna have 50 questions. So please reach out, joe@atten.io, happy to answer your questions. As you can see, the first thing I'll do with your email is forward it to the professionals that I work with. But I'm happy to respond to anything you have. I want to just thank Stanford for having us today. Really, just a great partnership, and love being a part of it.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Joe.
Awesome.
Always.
Great to have you guys here.
Yeah.
Come back.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.